Commander Dubois claims that he gave you 960,000 to share as a committee. How much was your own personal share?
Well, let me say good morning to your listeners and to say that Commander Dubois' claim is a palpable falsehood. In fact, the National Signals Bureau Act is the law that birthed the National Signals Bureau. And so, prior to the passage of that act, there was no entity known as the National Signals Bureau, which was subsequently headed by Governor Dubois following its establishment. And so, when Governor Dubois argued through his lawyer that he had spent 960,000 Ghana cedis on the Committee for Defense and Interior to facilitate the passage of the law that birthed the National Signals Bureau, he doubled in falsehood. Because you see, an entity must be in existence before budgetary allocation can be made to that particular entity of state. So the question to ask is, where did Governor Dubois, assuming without admitting that he was the Director General of the non-existent entity at the time the committee spearheaded the passage of Act 1040, or if you like, the National Signals Bureau Act 2020. Where did they get that budgetary allocation from? Because the entity needed to be established in the first place. Then, once it was now counted as an agency under the Ministry of National Security at the time, Parliament would now do budgetary allocation for that particular agency in order that that agency would now be in the position to spend. You see how illogical Governor Dubois' argument is. It doesn't make sense at all. And that is why I described his move as a desperate one. Governor Dubois, let me put on record, was introduced to the committee long after the passage of the act. 6 months down the line, after Parliament had passed Act 1040, he was appointed as the first Director General of the NSB and brought to the committee for the first time around May thereabout and introduced to us by Honorable Albert Kandapa, the Minister for National Security, who actually spearheaded or sponsored the bill before Parliament. And so at all material times, the person the committee knew and dealt with was Honorable Albert Kandapa. Of course, he was ably assisted at the time by Mr. Joshua Treme, of blessed memory, may his soul rest in peace, who served as the National Security Coordinator at the time. So throughout the period that Parliament became seized with the bill, which eventually became Act 1040, Governor Dubois has no standing at the National Security outfit. So please, in his desperate attempt to justify the expenditures which have landed him before court, he should not drag the Committee for Defense and Interior into his, woes. We won't countenance that at all.
In
any case, I think the charges that have been preferred against him, it talks about the movement of funds belonging to the National Signals Bureau into private accounts. I don't want to prejudice the suit that is currently pending before the court. But you see, what he has done touches on parliamentary privilege. And at an appropriate time, we will take steps that are fit to ensure that Parliament's reputation is not soiled. I mean, I wouldn't hesitate to take those steps when the House reconvenes, because what he did touches on parliamentary privilege. And his lawyer, Akyea, ought to have known better. I am very surprised at his lawyer, Akyea. I mean, is a four-term former member of Parliament, and ought to have known better.
Honorable, I want some clarification on this. You said you were introduced to Kwabena Duboaheng 6 months after the passage of the bill. Was this in 2020 or 2021?
No, 2021.
2021.
So, Senator, how could Kwabena Duboaheng claim that he spent money on the committee to facilitate the passage of a law which had come into existence before his appointment?
He says these expenditures were made in 2020, 2021.
No. Listen, for what purpose?
He says MP's allowance, that's what they call it.
Allowance for what?
I'm not so sure what it is about.
Yes,
but
allowance for the enactment of a law.
Yes, NSB Act 2020.
That is why the allegation creates the impression as if he, Kwabena Duboaheng, bribed the committee to perform its constitutional mandate. And that is why I'm saying that if that were the case, the law had already been passed. So how would you spend 950,000 on the committee to facilitate the passage of a law which had come into being, and he, Kwabena Duboaheng, became the first beneficiary of the law which had come into being prior to his own appointment? Because without that law, he couldn't have been appointed as Director General of the National Signals Bureau.
Oh, educate me. When you say that this ministry is sponsoring this bill, is the ministry then responsible for the allowances of members of a committee whilst working on this bill?
Ministries don't pay allowances of members of parliamentary committees. Parliamentary committee allowances are paid for by the Parliament of Ghana. We attend meetings. There's an attendance sheet which will be signed by members who turn up for the meetings. At the end of the day, Parliament itself has budget for the payment of such allowances. And that is what it is.
Oh, so at no point in time during the work on the bill is there any financial transaction between the members of the committee and perhaps the ministry was sponsoring the bill? Nothing like that?
At all. Not at all. There are times when, for instance, meetings are held outside the confines of Parliament. Now, when such meetings are to be held outside the presence of Parliament, there have been times when ministries will bear the cost of such meetings, as in maybe paying for the hotel accommodation. The ministries are not responsible for the payment of the allowance of members of Parliament. It is not done.
You see, can thank you payments be made to you?
No, we don't tolerate that. Nobody does thank you payment.
So after you finish the work, I can't come to you and say,
in any case, thank you payments for what? For the performance of our constitutional mandate, it's not that.
I see. So you're saying at
But
no
I've made
point,
a point
okay,
which is fundamental, there is no
Okay.
crossover. I have stated that at all material times, the people we dealt with were the minister who was the principal sponsor of the bill and the national security coordinator. It's sad to know that the Mr. Joshua Treme is no more. But Honorable Kandapa is alive. He is alive. And so, if I am telling a lie, Honorable Kandapa is alive. He can, call in and controvert the statement I have put out.
because it's also suggested in that document that he had the blessings of Mr. Joshua Treme. He is not alive anyway, but he said he had the blessings, that if he produced a document where he says that Mr. Joshua Treme gave him clearance to create that account and use it for the purposes for which you use it. One of them which you have denied.
Mr. Joshua Treme gave him what?
Gave him authority to create the account which is the subject of the investigation. And the monies that went into that account was used for many things, including what you have denied.
Senator, who was he at the time when the act was being enacted? Who was he? You see, we need to put things in their proper perspective. Who was he? Was he an appointee of the National Signals Bureau, which was non-existent at the time?
Okay.
Let's get serious.
So your question is, in what capacity did he do the things he's claiming to have
Who
done?
was he? Because you can only create an account for an agency if you are an employee of that agency. Whether you are Director General or not, you are an employee. So before the NPP even comes into existence, you are saying that you had the authorization of Joshua Treme to create an account. And who did the budgetary allocation for the non-existing entities? So where were you drawing the money from? From which coffers? Because you see, when it is time for budget, the consideration of the budget of the various agencies under the ministries created, they appear one by one. So in the case of the former National Security Ministry, which has now been subsumed under the Ministry of Interior, there are 3 agencies. The National Investigations Bureau would have their own budget, which would be scrutinized and approved. The committee would normally put a report before the plenary for the approval of the entire House. Then you have the Research Department, which is also an agency under that same Ministry of National Security. Their budget is looked at, approved by the committee, and the report brought before the entire plenary for approval. Then you have the National Signals Bureau, which is also an agency. It is the youngest of the 3 agencies. And that is why I'm saying that it was birthed by the law known as Act 1040. Right? So they would also normally appear. The committee would look at the budget, the allocation, the performance, etc., and proceed to approve of the allocations made to that agency and then put a report before the plenary for passage. Then at the tail end, we have the, what's the name of the Appropriations Act, which will now be passed to allow for the various agencies to spend. That is what the budget entails. The procedure is elaborate. So the question is, prior to the coming into being of the National Signals Bureau, I am asking, where Edubwahine, who was not even an appointee at the time, got money and facilitated the passage of the act? So that is what I'm talking about. So please, why you are talking about, thank you. So Edubwahine would come and thank the committee for passing an act of parliament 6 months down the line. It doesn't make sense. Please.
And for most of you in politics, you know the way the public feels about this, in some of this information when they are put out. Some people take it hook, line, and sinker, even without the necessary evidence. So what would you do about this?
That is why I found it compelling to issue a statement and put it out there, expose the falsehood, the desperate attempt by Edubwahine to, as it were, extricate himself. That's why I put out the statement. And the statement is very clear. I took pains and dealt with the antecedents, brought to the fore the fact that the entity in question, the one Edubwahine headed, is a relatively new entity. And that it is the very law he is claiming he facilitated its passage, which birthed the organization he subsequently headed. So you see that his statement is very incongruous. There is no logic in it. That's why I took pains and put out that statement. So that any form of disinformation, discerning minds will know what we are talking about.
But beyond that, this is an allegation that goes to taint a committee of parliament. Do you intend to take any further action?
I made that point very clear. And that is why I have so far found fault with Akyea. I indicated that he's a 4-term former member of parliament. And not to have known that when he put out that statement, and that letter he wrote to the National Security Coordinator, it has its own consequences. I'm saying that the matter touches on parliamentary privilege. So once you try to drag Parliament's reputation into disrepute, the standing orders provide for some remedies. And with those remedies are definitely going to be evoked at an appropriate time. Yes.
Thank you very much for speaking to us.
Okay. I thought that the statement be put out for the public to appreciate, the stance of the committee, because at the time I was the ranking member. Now I'm the chairman of the committee. So if the name of the committee is being dragged in the back, I think that I owe the good people of this country a duty to state or straighten up things.
Honorable, thank you. Thank you for speaking to us.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the opportunity, Senator.